Hey guys, tonight we dive headfirst into a place so wild and chaotic you probably won't survive even a single night in a medieval brothel. Picture this. The heavy, sticky heat clings to your skin like a second layer. The narrow alley leading up to the hulking, timber-framed building is lit only by flickering lanterns, shadows dancing like restless spirits against the cobblestones. The smell hits you first. Not roses, obviously, but a pungent mix of smoke, sweat, unwashed bodies, and something faintly sour you quickly realize is fermented ale left to sit for hours. The air is thick with murmurs, loud laughter, and occasional sharp arguments in half a dozen languages you barely understand. You shove open a heavy wooden door that creaks ominously on rusty hinges, and you think, maybe this isn't my scene. Spoiler alert. Nope. It's not just not your scene. It's an overwhelming assault on your senses, patience, and clean living instincts. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, do me a favor and drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is locally. I love getting a sense of the clock and place as we explore these odd corners of history together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you trudge deeper into this sprawling den of raucous activity, it strikes you how unlike any modern concept of a night out this is. This is a place that operates on raw human survival instincts disguised as commerce. Every corner hums with the tension of bodies pressed too close, the desperate shoves for space, the glint of wary eyes measuring threats. You have to understand, medieval brothels were not the candlelit, cozy rooms of romance often imagined. No, these were bustling hive-like establishments where anonymity barely existed and personal safety was a thin veneer. The wooden beams overhead creak and groan under the weight of decades, their surfaces darkened by nicotine and grime. Outside, the city's noises fade into the background, but in here, every shout echoes, every cough sharp and intrusive. You wonder how anyone can sleep in a place like this, let alone feel safe. There's a sick irony in how this place, meant to be about pleasure and profit, manages to smell more like a livestock market. Historians still argue whether brothels served more as vital social safety valves or as exploitative traps for the powerless, but either way, your modern sensibilities clash violently with the reality here. In fact, the medieval mindset around brothels was complicated, tolerated by law in many cities, begrudgingly accepted as a necessary evil, yet shrouded in moral hypocrisy. You wouldn't just walk in unprepared. The risks here are not just social, but deeply physical. Yadhaiwo crocodile dung sunscreen we talked about last time, supposedly used to prevent sunburn? Well, in this place, the remedies are no less bizarre and often no less dangerous. The stale air, the heat, the filth. It's a perfect stew for sickness and misery. If you're hoping for an easily digestible story or a romanticized peak, you're in the wrong spot. What you're stepping into is rough, real, and uncompromising. Before we get deeper into the thick of it, remember, no sudden moves, keep your wits about you, and if you miraculously survive the night, I'll be here to tell you how it all went down. But spoiler, survival itself is a serious challenge here. You push past the crowd toward the bedchambers, and immediately the air changes, or maybe you just notice it more. The lingering mix of smoke and sweat doesn't dissipate. Instead, it thickens, melding with the rancid odor of damp straw and old linens. The bedchambers themselves are claustrophobic boxes crammed into whatever space the building affords. Imagine a dozen or more low wooden beds wedged side by side, separated by little more than threadbare curtains, or sometimes just blankets hung loosely. Privacy? Forget it. If you thought your shared dorm at a hostel was uncomfortable, this is next-level invasion of personal space. This is where the reality bites, and your modern privacy instincts scream for help. Each bedroom barely holds enough space for a narrow bed and a small chest that the workers use for their meager belongings. The mattresses are thin, stuffed with straw that looks like it's been recycled through generations of unlucky sleepers. Your nose flares from the obvious. When was the last time these straw-stuffed mattresses saw fresh air or sunlight? Probably never. The feeling of dampness clings to cloth and skin alike, creating an at-constant low level of discomfort you might not notice at first, but can't forget. Historians still argue whether brothel workers ever truly saw these spaces as home, or only as grim workplaces to endure between shifts. Some accounts claim a few of the women decorated their corners with tiny personal touches, a torn piece of colorful fabric, a smuggled candle, or cracked mirrors. But overall, this is prison-like in atmosphere. You start understanding why mental strain was high, and why any respite felt like a rare gift. The walls are made of plastered timber frames, but over time, years of smoke, damp, and neglect have rendered the surfaces grimy and cracked. Small cracks let in drafts at night, and in winter, things get even worse. But no one here complains loud enough to be heard. Everyone's struggle is finely tuned to put one foot in front of the other, hoping to survive the night. A quirky bit. Scholars have found traces of medieval lime. Yes, actual ground-up oyster shells sometimes sprinkled into bedding, thought to help repel lice. Pretty far from your modern, chemical-laden mattress protectors, right? Still, it shows that even back then, people tried to manage the unbearable conditions with whatever meager means they had. The beds offer little protection, and with the close proximity of strangers, the spread of lice, fleas, and who knows what other critters is inevitable. Disease waits patiently in every corner. Any sense of dignity must be carefully preserved, mostly through silence and enduring discomfort. You can hear muffled sobs, whispered curses, and the occasional laughter that sounds forced or brittle. Humor, as historians note, was a vital tool for endurance here. The women and men who made the brothel their temporary home often traded wry jokes about their lot in life, the slim odds of escape, or the city's corrupt officials who sometimes winked at the whole business. These moments of levity, however fleeting, formed an invisible glue holding the fragile community together. As you lie down on the scrappy mattress for a brief moment of rest, the sounds of the brothel don't soften. They grow louder, almost invasive. A dispute flares up just a few beds away, voices rough and heated. You realize quickly how little you can sleep here, not for lack of desire, but because the environment itself refuses it. This cramped, foul enclave of rest, or what counts as rest, is just the beginning. What happens beyond these walls, the dangers you can't see yet, loom large and dark. The harshness seeps into your bones, and you wonder how anyone manages to live through nightly repeats of this chaotic ordeal. The bedchambers are barely a refuge before you start noticing the dangers lurking in every shadow. This place never truly sleeps, and the risks aren't just about rough customers or cramped quarters. One wrong glance, one refusal, or even a misplaced word can ignite fierce violence, whether from jealous patrons, rival workers, or the brothel keepers themselves. You quickly realize that keeping your head down is the first rule of survival here. Disease? Oh, it's not just a word whispered in the darker corners. It's a deadly presence that hangs heavy like the stale air. The infamous pox, or syphilis as we know it today, was spreading rampantly through medieval cities, with brothels functioning like perfect transmission hubs. There were no antibiotics, no real understanding of sexually transmitted infections, and the quarantine measures, where they existed, were often inadequate or ignored entirely. You feel every tiny breeze carry a possible threat. Historians still argue whether the widespread pox was a cause or a consequence of legalized prostitution, but the correlation is undeniable. Brothels, meant as places of escape or business, became hotbeds for debilitating diseases. You try to remind yourself that this is not some sanitized fantasy. This is raw, sickening reality. Violence wasn't just a risk from the outside either. Infighting among the workers, theft of precious goods, and power struggles were commonplace. The brothel was both a haven and a battlefield. You hear whispers of women using knives in self-defense, or guards dragging unruly patrons into dark corners for discipline. If you thought tavern brawls were bad, this place's roughness makes those seem tame. There's also the danger of betrayal. Trust is a currency rarer than gold. You quickly learn that alliances shift with alarming speed. A smile one moment can turn cold the next. A friend become competitor. In some cities, the law offered some protection, measures against violence or exploitation, but enforcement varied wildly. Bribery was rampant. Guards themselves could be threats or saviors depending on which side of the coin you landed. On a lighter note, one of the strangest fringe tidbits folks might not expect is the use of crocodile dung as a supposed multitasking remedy, used by some women, not in this brothel perhaps, but during the medieval era, as a sort of sunscreen or topical treatment. Whether or not you'd want to trust that, it speaks volumes about the lengths people went to manage the unpleasantness around them. Imagine having that as your skincare routine after a violent night. As you trudge through a narrow corridor lined with half-open doors, you can't help but shudder, thinking how tenuous life here is. The brothel was effectively a microcosm of medieval urban danger. Everyone who entered walked a tightrope balancing desperation, exploitation, and fleeting moments of control. That night, as the city's bells toll in the distance, you recognize a brutal truth. The threats aren't just physical, they seep into every corner of the mental space, the spirit. The risk of breakdown, of losing oneself entirely in this relentless environment, is as real as the physical beatings and infections. You're not just a visitor here, you're a prospective victim of a harsh world. Finally, a note on medieval medicine, a crowd favorite for historical debates. Treatments were part superstition, part experimentation. Plague doctors with their beaked masks might loom in your imagination, but inside brothels, remedies ranged from herbal poultices made of questionable ingredients to prayers whispered over infected wounds. Hygiene was poor, so these rudimentary approaches often did more harm than good. If you thought your modern health concerns were bad, imagine being trapped in a place that sometimes felt like a petri dish on legs. With the sounds of distant shouting and restless movement echoing around you, you realize that danger here is constant, invisible, and utterly exhausting. You think you're just here for a visit, but the customer's brutal reality quickly hits you like a cold splash of water. These nights are far from glamorous. The people who came to brothels weren't always the lords in velvet cloaks you might picture. Often they were weary travelers, desperate merchants, soldiers and common townsfolk, each bearing their own aches and worries. Many came because they had no other release in a rigid, profoundly different society. But make no mistake, the experience could be merciless. The moment a customer entered the brothel, they were not greeted with warm smiles, but rough glances and immediate calculations about who could take their money. There was no delicate dance or courtship. It was business, pure and simple, sometimes edged with outright disdain. Workers had to hustle quickly. Time was money, and the next client was always waiting. If you expected a kind or gentle experience, the brothel would teach you otherwise very fast. Many customers experienced neglect or even outright hostility, not because the workers were cruel, but because this was a place where exhaustion and mutual distrust reigned. Without much social cushioning, rough behavior was standard and expected. Physical confrontation happened not infrequently when customers overstepped boundaries or tried to avoid paying. You don't just get service here. You negotiate, sometimes with blunt force and sharp words. Humor cracks through the grit, though, a survival tool for customers and workers alike. A fringe tidbit that tickles the imagination. Some merchants came wielding fake coin or play money, known as checks in the medieval era. In reality, these were often bluff gambles, and trying the brothel's tolerance for such tricks could result in eviction or worse, a public shaming. So, customers had to gamble with their reputations as much as their coins. Historians still argue about the nature of client-worker relationships. Were there moments of genuine rapport, or was it purely transactional and cruel? The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in the middle. Some workers developed favorites, and a few patrons tried to form awkward, short-lived friendships amid the chaos. But these were exceptions, not the norm. And unlike modern separation of customer and employee, social boundaries were far blurrier here. One moment someone might be laughing with customers, and the next glaring at them or pulling guardianship as dispute flamed. Brothels were volatile spaces that required constant negotiation of respect and power. The physical reality for these customers was also harsh. No soothing beds or fluffy linens, the rough straw and coarse wool were brutal, and exhaustion often overtook comfort. You wonder how many came hoping for rest, but instead found only more tension and cold impatience. You also start to understand why many patrons visited not just for the services, but for companionship, fleeting as it was. In a turbulent, often lonely medieval life, even a shared joke with someone inside these walls was a whisper of something human amid transactional harshness. At the same time, brothel clients faced their own stigmas and dangers outside these walls. Laws regulating brothels existed, but were often lumped with moral condemnation, and arrests or fines could disrupt a customer's regular life. Guards crashed into these dens unpredictably, sending customers scrambling, but some officials turned blind eyes in exchange for bribes or favors, another layer of complexity in these unstable nights. In every harsh clash, grubby handshake, and narrow escape from angry guards, the customers played their own dangerous game too. In a place designed for quick economic exchange, survival was a constant battle for dignity and sanity. So, as you imagine yourself as a customer, for just one night, you realize this brutality wasn't just the workers' burden, but was shared by everyone who stepped into these walls. In here, hope and hardship tangled tightly through every whispered deal and passed coin. Now brace yourself for one of the darkest, yet strangely fascinating corners of this nightmarish place: hygiene and medieval medicine. You might think, well, surely they wash sometimes. But think again. Cleanliness was barely a consideration here, more a luxury than reality. The medieval understanding of hygiene was minimal. Soap existed, yes, but was expensive and not routinely used like today. In a brothel bustling with bodies pressed close, disease and filth were inseparable companions. You noticed the grime caked into corners, the stained linens reused far beyond their freshness. Baths, rare and considered a luxury mostly for the upper classes or maybe a monastery's sick chamber, but certainly not common here. The brothel was a breeding ground for lice, fleas, and the notorious itch, an itch that could drive you mad with discomfort. There's something haunting in knowing that every surface you touch carries the invisible traces of whoever came before you. The stench is thick enough to taste, a cocktail of human sweat, stale urine, ale spilled hours ago, and cleansing methods that rely more on hope than science. And here's a quirky tidbit to lighten the mood a bit. Some workers reportedly used dried toads as medicine, believing their magical properties could ward off disease or bad luck. Strange, yes, but it reveals how desperation and lack of knowledge shaped harsh practices. Historians still argue whether medieval bathhouses offered any real health benefits or were simply social gathering points. Either way, such places were often off limits to the lower classes or seen as morally suspect when linked to prostitution. For you in the brothel, the absence of hygiene means your pores feel clogged with grime by dawn, and skin ailments are a grim daily reality. When it came to healing wounded bodies or treating infections, what passes for medicine verged between herbal guesswork and superstition. Remedies included poultices made from garlic, vinegar, or even mercury, yes, the heavy poisonous metal, used to cleanse wounds or supposedly purge the body of evil spirits or disease. Sometimes these treatments did more harm than good. On the plus side, consuming herbs like rosemary was thought to improve mood or resistance, so a handful might be tucked away as a faint hope. As you watch workers moving in slow, tired circles, rubbing ointments that smell awkwardly like musty herbs mixed with sour wine, the feeling of fragility is tangible. No antibiotics, no clean bandages, just a constant battle against unseen enemies. It's a miracle so many made it through even a single night without succumbing to infections or worse. An interesting scholarly debate surrounds whether brothels might have indirectly contributed to some public health measures by concentrating aware populations, though the effectiveness was limited by poor knowledge and social stigma. Still, there were rudimentary attempts to isolate the sick or ban visibly ill workers, though enforcement was patchy at best. The night wears on, and the weight of grime and poor health care piles on. Body and spirit grow weary in tandem, each breath a reminder that surviving this environment is as much a test of endurance as anything else. The brothel keepers, those shadowy figures striding through this maelstrom of despair, hold ironclad power here, and you quickly learn that their control is part psychological, part brutal enforcement. These individuals, often men but sometimes women, owned or managed the establishments. They were the puppet masters pulling strings, keeping a tight hold on mostly powerless workers and a teetering clientele. You're about to realize just how precarious and complex this balance of control really was. Brothel keepers were master manipulators, skilled at reading desperation and wielding fear. They controlled who worked and when, collected the earnings, set prices, and, crucially, dispensed punishment when loyalty faltered or order threatened to collapse. If you thought the cruelty stopped at the door, think again. Keepers were known for imposing harsh rules and exacting brutal fines or physical punishments for infractions real or imagined. You can imagine how little recourse a worker had in that hierarchical nightmare. Some keepers operated with cold efficiency, running brothels more like business ventures, ensuring enough clientele without triggering law enforcement. Others relied on intimidation and violence to keep control, fostering an environment thick with fear and suspicion. It's easy to see why many people inside the brothel viewed the keeper as a necessary evil, a figure you both dread and depend on. On the fringe side of this world, there are rumors and stories about some brothel keepers who used herbal potions or rudimentary poisons to keep unruly customers or troublesome workers in line. Whether fact or folklore, these tales underscore the cutthroat reality of power here. Some keepers might have also played a role in local politics, using their establishments as gathering points to influence, blackmail, or bribe officials to look the other way. Historians still argue about the extent to which brothel keepers were purely exploiters or sometimes protectors. Some evidence suggests that a savvy keeper might try to maintain relative order or even protect favored workers from worse abuses, but such cases were exceptions, clinging to a grim overall system built on exploitation. You watch as a keeper calls someone over with a bark and then swiftly changes to a soothing tone when money exchanges hands. It's a delicate dance of intimidation and negotiation, designed to preserve their power without inviting rebellion. It reminds you that power here is never absolute, but a fragile balance, an ongoing performance amid chaos. Remember how we talked about the strange use of crocodile dung sunscreen? Here, that same kind of bizarre resourcefulness comes alive, whether in concocting medicines to keep their workers fit, or in schemes designed to cheat authorities and extend their grip. Control here is as much about cunning as about muscle. Each night the keepers patrol their dominions, eyes sharp for trouble and ears tuned for whispers. To survive a night, you'd have to master their unpredictable moods, avoid their wrath, and quietly maneuver the intricate web of alliances and grudges threading through the brothel's shadows. So, if you thought the brothel was just a place of fleeting pleasure, the keepers show you clearly that it's also a ruthless power game, a survival arena where your very soul might be the currency. You're hungry now, aren't you? Not surprising. But don't expect anything close to a gourmet meal here. In the medieval brothel, food and drink are less about pleasure and more about survival, barely enough fuel to keep bodies functioning through endless grinding nights. The grub you get is tough, chilly, and often stale, served in hurried moments between the chaos. Your taste buds hold on to hope, but the reality is bleak. Bread makes up the staple, usually hard and dense, often made from coarser grains you'd hesitate to call wheat. It's paired with watery soup, sometimes thickened with whatever scraps of vegetables or meat are available. You might get a chunk of cheese or a boiled egg if lucky. Meat? Rare and mostly of the game or offal variety, prepared in ways meant to extract every shred of nourishment rather than taste. Ale flows freely, but it's weak and muddy, more a source of hydration and cheap buzz than any refined drinking experience. Boiling water for tea or coffee isn't a thing yet, so ale and wine dilute dehydration and dull the endless discomfort. You'd better drink slowly because the alcohol might just mask some of the pain, but will never cure the underlying exhaustion. Interestingly, historians have found evidence of communal pots and sharing plates, meaning that hygienic concerns in food prep were minimal to non-existent, the perfect setup for cross-contamination of illnesses, a risk no one here seemed able to escape. This adds to the already brutal challenges of immune defense in these filthy conditions. A quirky, slightly hopeful tidbit. Certain herbs, like parsley or mint, might get added, both to flavor the sparse food and as a superstitious attempt to ward off bad smells or illness. Medieval belief systems were deeply intertwined with food, with the idea that what you eat could balance your humors or affect your temperament, so even the most basic meal carried layers of expectant meaning. Scholars still argue how often workers could get more than the bare minimum, but it's widely accepted that food was rationed tightly with the priorities heavily skewed in favor of clients or keepers. For the women and the staff, every meal was a battle against hunger and poor nutrition, compounding the physical toll the brothel exacted. You watch the dregs of a communal ale cup passed around, realizing how close everyone here is pushed to the edge, not just emotionally, but physically starving for sustenance. Hunger gnaws relentlessly, a shadow companion to the sprawling dangers. And when you think hunger is your only problem, remember that fermentation and food storage techniques were primitive. Spoilage was rampant, so eating anything not fresh risked food poisoning or worse. Considering the average medieval city's sanitation issues, a brothel's grub was yet another hazard in this brutal environment. The night drags on, and with each meager bite, your body protests but pushes forward, clinging to the faint promise of dawn. You wouldn't expect to gain weight here, just barely to survive, clinging to the slimmest thread of sustenance. Even as you try to hold on to some sense of order, the presence of guards and the looming threat of outside law enforcement weigh heavily on the brothel's atmosphere. Guards are a strange mix of protectors and oppressors here. They patrol the building's perimeter, mostly tasked with maintaining some semblance of peace and keeping unwanted troublemakers out. But their presence is far from reassuring. You soon realize their protection comes with strings attached. Guards often turned a blind eye to many illegal or immoral acts inside the brothel, but they were just as likely to rough up patrons or workers when it suited their interests, especially if bribery or blackmail were off the table. You see how corruption and power are two sides of the same dusty coin in this city: guard favors for acceptable bribes, harsh crackdowns in response to unpaid debts or scandalous rumors. It's a game of negotiation, and nobody is a true winner. Occasionally, the brothel would face unexpected raids, official crackdowns inspired by religious authorities or civic leaders hoping to clean up the streets. These raids were chaotic, violent, and terrifying for everyone involved. Workers were rounded up, sometimes imprisoned or beaten, clients fled, and the establishment itself could be shuttered or fined. This created a climate of constant suspicion and fear. A little-known fact: in some medieval cities, brothels were legally licensed and taxed as a way to control and profit from vice. These licensed brothels had official protection, as long as they followed strict but often inconsistently applied rules. In other places, though, brothels operated under the radar, constantly fearing exposure. This patchwork of laws means the brothel's relationship with guards could swing from hostile standoff to uneasy truce overnight. Rumors circulated that some guards were covertly employed by brothel keepers to act as enforcers or to sabotage rival establishments. This blend of officialdom and criminality added a further layer of intrigue and danger. You realize just how tangled and fragile the brothel's ecosystem really is. You see a guard approach, eyeing a rowdy patron threatening a worker, but instead of acting immediately, he assesses the situation, waiting, watching, for the right moment to intervene or possibly to collect a payoff. Every move here carries consequences, and everyone plays their cards with caution. Historians still argue whether these legal protections ultimately helped improve safety or just institutionalized exploitation. Either way, the brothel guards exemplify the uneasy balance between control and chaos that defines this brutal place. The night marches relentlessly onward, and beneath the uneasy watch of the guards, you understand that protection is as fragile as the flickering lanterns illuminating this squalid den. Any sense of security is temporary, contingent, and often a lie. Sleep? In here? Forget about it. The night is an endless cacophony of noise, disputes, and raw emotion that never quite lets you relax. You try to catch a breath between the hollers from drunks, the heated quarrels erupting over stolen coins or broken promises, and the constant fundamental hum of bodies moving through tight spaces. The volume and chaos are overwhelming to your modern ears, trained for quiet bedrooms or even a bustling city, but never this multiple-layered din. Voices rise and fall in sharp bursts, laughter cracking harshly one moment, angry yells the next. Somewhere nearby, a woman sobs softly, her misery weaving through the din like a fragile thread. It's like an orchestra conducted by desperation and fatigue, played out in cramped rooms lit by flickering tallow candles that barely hold the dark at bay. Walls rattling, doors slamming, a chair scraping. The soundtrack of sheer survival here is relentless. You probably wouldn't expect music, but yes, some nights there's crude singing or whispered songs. These moments of shared tune aren't exactly joy. They are more distractions, collective breathing spaces, a brief break from the grinding everyday reality. The lyrics are often bawdy or darkly humorous, mocking the very lives everyone leads, a gallows humor laced with truth. An intriguing tidbit: whisper networks existed, passing rumors about who could cause trouble, where enemies lurked, or where the guards might be less vigilant. This constant flow of information was both a weapon and a shield, helping some survive, but always reminding you that threat lurked everywhere, even within the family of the brothel. Historians still debate the emotional impacts of sustained stress and forced proximity here, but even without their words, you can sense it yourself. Constant noise erodes patience, frays nerves, and exhausts your mind long before your body. This is no place for calm or peace. It's a grinding trial of endurance. The bedchambers you retired to earlier are hardly sanctuaries, but battlefields for rest. Thin walls don't muffle screaming matches or drunken disputes. Sometimes fights break out in the hallways or even between the beds. You quickly learn to flinch away, skillfully avoiding anyone's wrath as you doze fitfully between invasions of sound. One thing is clear: quiet isn't just rare, it's practically a myth here. Even when the voice drops to murmurs, tension hangs heavy, making sleep light, restless, and fragmented. And as the night crawls toward dawn, the weight of exhaustion grows ever heavier, a physical ache layered atop the mental strain. Despite this, life and noise persist, churning in an endless, exhausting loop that greets each new arrival and refuses to let go. You realize that to survive a night here, you'd not only need thick skin and sharper nerves, but an ability to function while utterly drained. You think the brothel's harshness stops at physical demands? Think again. Women inside face a world shaped by fierce struggle, fragile control, and razor-thin chances for fleeting power. Their lives are complex, a continuous negotiation between submission and resistance. You catch glimpses of resilience even in the darkest moments. Despite the brutality and the daily grind, some women carved out niches of relative influence. Maybe it was a favored client, a sharp wit, or alliances with others that provided brief refuge. But these moments are fragile and fragile. You quickly see that solidarity, while it existed, was limited by competition and survival instincts. Every smile could mask a calculated move. Every gesture could carry hidden meanings. Power struggles inside the brothel aren't just with customers or keepers, but among workers themselves. Hierarchies form, often informally, based on experience, age, or who brings in the best income. The senior women often exert subtle control over newcomers, offering mentorship mixed with warnings and sometimes harsh discipline. It's a microcosm of the larger medieval society's own power dynamics, but intensified by the proximity and competition. A curious tidbit here is how some women reportedly maintained small personal shrines or talismans, a cracked saint's medal, dried flowers, or worn fabric, believing these objects offered protection against evil spirits or misfortune. It reflects how intensely spiritual and superstitious life could be for those clinging to hope amid the darkness. Historians still debate to what extent women in these roles exercised true agency or were simply pawns in a rigid system of exploitation. The truth, as always, lies in between. Glimpses of empowerment exist, but are often overshadowed by harsh realities and limited choices. You see moments of quiet before storms, women whispering secrets, sharing stolen food, or softly singing lullabies to children sometimes kept hidden. These brief human connections flicker like small candles in the brothel's overwhelming gloom. But there's always the looming threat of punishment, eviction, or violence. Being out of favor with the keeper or a powerful client could mean swift and harsh consequences, loss of income, access to basic needs, or worse. You realize quickly that survival here depends on endurance, both physical and psychological, with little room for error. And yet, through this struggle and hardship, women find ways to resist. A sharp word, a sly defiance, or calculated alliances become their tools in an oppressive world. Not all stories end in despair. Some found escape routes or settled into roles that offered marginal security. But these were exceptions that highlight the harshness of the rule. So, within these walls, women live a life of ceaseless conflict and courage, navigating a treacherous world where control is a precious, often ephemeral prize. You wouldn't just be a spectator. You'd be a participant in a relentless human drama with stakes far beyond the night. You'd expect this place to be steeped in nothing but harsh reality, yet superstitions and rumors fill the brothel like smoke from the tallow candles. The medieval mind, shaped by religion, folklore, and daily uncertainty, clung to bizarre beliefs to make sense of the chaos around them. In here, myths became tools for comfort or warnings to keep order. One popular superstition involved protective charms, tiny carved crosses, sprigs of herbs like rue or garlic, or even strange objects such as bits of bone or animal teeth. Workers and clients alike might tuck these items into clothing or under pillows, hoping to fend off evil spirits, curses, or sickness. The overlap between spiritual belief and practical life was seamless. A broken charm might portend disaster as surely as a bad trade. Others whispered of curses laid by jealous rivals or disgruntled clients. Stories circulated about ghosts or demons haunting certain rooms or beds, causing nightmares, illnesses, or worse. These tales were as much about explaining unexplainable misfortune as about maintaining social control. After all, if you believe a room is cursed, you're less likely to cause trouble there, or more likely to accept a misfortune as fate rather than injustice. A fringe tidbit: some believed that cats prowling inside the brothel weren't just pests, but supernatural guardians. These feline protectors supposedly warded off evil spirits or bad luck, a comforting thought amid all the uncertainty. You might notice antique illustrations representing cats as mystical creatures, and in daily life, their role was no less significant to the people relying on every bit of superstition. Historians still argue whether these beliefs genuinely affected behavior or were primarily theatrical social tools. But regardless of interpretation, their presence influenced how people navigated peril and stress. Rumors and gossip were also vital. Whisper networks spread warnings about dangerous customers, upcoming raids, or who had fallen ill. This informal intelligence helped some survive or avoid trouble, but also fueled mistrust and paranoia. Knowing what to believe was half the challenge. You start to understand that superstition wasn't simply backward thinking, but an imaginative coping mechanism, a way to grasp the uncontrollable in a world that felt unpredictable and often hostile. It gave both workers and clients a psychological lifeline amid the grim realities of brothel life. So, the next time you think superstition is mere nonsense, remember how these beliefs shaped this harsh, noisy environment and silently threaded through every whispered conversation and every tiny charm clutched in the dark. Now, the academic detour, historians still argue about the very nature of brothels. Were they spaces of illicit pleasure or grim engines of punishment and survival? You get drawn into an ongoing debate between seeing medieval brothels as tolerated social safety valves or as cruel, exploitative institutions that preyed on the vulnerable. On one side, scholars argue that legalized or tolerated brothels served societal purposes, providing controlled outlets for sexual needs in a deeply patriarchal and restrictive society. They might have helped reduce sexual violence or infidelity by channeling desires into regulated spaces. This view portrays brothels as complex social tools, contributing to urban order despite moral ambiguities. On the flip side, many historians emphasize the exploitative aspects: economic coercion, rampant violence, and the systemic marginalization of workers. They highlight how poverty and limited choices funneled women, and sometimes men, into these harsh environments, effectively making brothels sites of punishment disguised as pleasure. You reflect on how both perspectives capture parts of this tangled truth. Brothels were neither purely pleasure palaces nor mere prisons. They were evolving institutions shaped by economic needs, social control, urban politics, and individual agency. A fascinating fringe theory suggests that some brothels functioned almost like informal community centers for marginalized women, offering a chaotic but critical social network and a degree of mutual support. This challenges simplistic views and adds shades of complexity. Historians still argue whether the tension between agency and victimhood defines the brothel experience more than any fixed category. The ambivalence is baked into the dusty wooden beams and cracked walls. The same space could be containment, complicit liberation, or both simultaneously. You realize that understanding this place requires peeling back layers of assumption, privilege, and romanticism. It's a reminder that the medieval world was far messier and more contradictory than simple good versus bad narratives allow. So, as the night drags toward dawn, you can't help but wonder, were brothels grim necessities, survival shelters, or places of fleeting escape, or all at once? The answer refuses to settle neatly, just like the raucous, restless hours you've witnessed. The brothel isn't just an isolated den of vice. It's a mirror reflecting wider medieval society back at you. This place reveals the tangled threads of economics, class, gender, and morality in a city living on the razor's edge of survival and chaos. You start to see how this harsh microcosm embodies societal contradictions, where need clashes with norms, exploitation entwines with agency, and survival often demands compromise. The economic forces that funnel people into this world are glaringly obvious. Poverty drives many here, but so do the broader social structures, limited opportunities for women, rigid class divisions, and the constant pressure of urbanization that swells city populations beyond manageable limits. Brothels function as unofficial labor markets, albeit brutal ones, where bodies become commodities. Morally, the brothel represents the pervasive medieval tension between public piety and private vice. The Church denounces these places openly, condemning the sin they represent, yet many city leaders tacitly accept or even regulate them, recognizing the pragmatic role they play. This hypocrisy is as old as civilization itself, but sharper here than in many places. A quirky tidbit here. In some medieval cities, brothels were required by law to mark their buildings with red or other distinctive signs to warn or shame, a kind of forced branding serving both practical and moral purposes. This visible marker made no effort to hide the existence of brothels, but instead entrenched their presence as unavoidable elements of city life. Historians still argue how much blame society as a whole bears for the conditions within these establishments. Was it simply cruel individuals, or systemic failures reflecting entrenched inequality? The brothel's walls don't have answers, but they echo the city's struggles with justice, poverty, and governance. You see how the brothel's very existence challenges us to confront uncomfortable realities about power, exploitation, and survival. Through its squalor, it throws into relief how medieval cities operated, where human lives danced precariously between dignity and degradation. So much of what the brothel reveals isn't just about sex or crime, but about the very fabric of the medieval world, its fears, its contradictions, and its unyielding human resilience amid hardship. Now you've seen enough to piece it all together, the raw, unvarnished reason you wouldn't survive a single night in a medieval brothel. With every sharp smell, every faded bruise, every thorny interaction, you face a gauntlet of hardships your modern mind struggles to comprehend. You carry the weight of dehydration, exhaustion, and foul air thick with bacteria and bad intentions. The narrow bedchambers offer no true refuge, no safe space to retreat to. Instead, you're constantly surrounded by noise, tension, and the threat of violence. Remember those relentless disputes and drunken brawls from earlier? They're not rare outbursts, but the steady background pulse of life here. You'd have to navigate a world where personal boundaries are fluid and often ignored, where disease spreads with terrifying ease, and where authority means little more than who has the sharpest stick or deepest pockets. Even the keepers, those rulers of this bizarre kingdom, are unpredictable, their favor as fleeting as the candle flame in these smoky rooms. Your hunger would gnaw relentlessly, your skin would itch with infestations, and every rumbling stomach or painful joint would be a reminder. This isn't an escape, it's endurance. The odd remedies and whispered superstitions offer little comfort amid such a harsh existence. You'd be trapped in a system where survival is both a physical and mental labyrinth. You'd never quite trust the guards, knowing their favor could turn into threat, and every shadow might hold betrayal. The fragile alliances between women carry as much danger as hope, and rumors and curses spin a never-ending web of suspicion. This world wasn't designed for kindness or rest. It was built on necessity, power, and a grim kind of resilience. If you thought modern discomforts were bad, you'd rapidly learn how much worse the medieval brothel's demands could be. Your body and soul would be tested far beyond what you might expect or accept today. No amount of modern hygiene, healthcare, or law enforcement softens these harsh realities. You have to live them. So, in this pulsing realm of noise, grime, and conflicting humanity, survival is not an achievement. It's a daily battle fought beneath flickering lights and cold stares. If you thought you could just get through the night, you'd quickly find that the night gets through you first.